Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Robert, how are you?
Great, thanks. You doing okay?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm thrilled to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very gracious indeed.
I loved your book. I read it the other day. I read it throughout Christmas and it was amazing. I
Oh,
enjoyed it
thank
so
you.
much.
I can tell you this, it was the best I could do.
Well, you did wonderful, Robert. You did great. I couldn't put it
Thanks.
down. Indeed, I was with my family and I had to keep sneaking away so that I could read more of it because I had to know what was going to happen.
Good, good. Well, I'm an admirer of your podcast. I like the concise format and, picking up really interesting episodes of history that, yeah, people don't generally know about. The Shirtwaist Factory Fire, which was a massive event. Yeah,
Right.
cool. Well done.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you. Well, I guess we can jump right into it. We'll get right into the interview today.
Sure.
We'll
Is there
jump.
anything, oh, did you send me questions?
I did. I sent you. There was six of them, six questions.
Okay. I think I looked at them the other day and I think I have lost track of them. I do apologize.
Oh, do you need me to send them over again?
Yeah, would you
Yes.
do that? I
Yes.
know I read them once and I probably printed them out, but I have lost track of them. So yeah, since
Let's see. Mm, Right over to you.
Hmm.
Mm,
So sorry.
Oh, no. You're totally okay. And it's Robert B at okpi.com.
Robert O at okpi.com.
Okay,
Roberto, like the Spanish version of Robert.
perfect. They should be sent over.
Thank you. I'm looking for them right now. I remember looking at them and not having any issues with them, but I'd like to refresh my memory so I can be
Yeah,
as helpful as possible for your listeners.
absolutely. Make sure I got that. Let's see here. Mhm. Let me make sure it went through. Yeah.
Oh, found them in my original email. So, what made you decide to write a book set during the Battle of the Bulge? Yes.
Yes.
I
Yep.
enjoyed historical fiction. Yes. What led me to Jim Tanter? That's simple to answer. Uh, tell us about Rooney and Jeep shows. Certainly. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Very good. Very good. Good questions. And I have not been asked these before.
Oh,
So
good,
pleased
good. Yeah,
with that.
I had taken a couple days to write them because I didn't want to, just get average questions. I wanted to think a little harder about the questions, and get ask some that maybe hadn't been asked before. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that some of those haven't been asked. Okay.
Yeah. By the way, you look about 16 years old. You're very youthful. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm 25. I'm about to be 26, so I
Good
appreciate
Lord. Amazing.
it. Well,
Amazing.
I'm sure in a couple years I'll really appreciate it too.
Right, right.
Well, thank you
Yes,
so
people
much.
probably, when you try to order a drink, people are probably constantly telling you to get the hell out of here.
Oh yeah, the other day I did, and he was like, You're not even 18." And I was like, "Here's my
Right,
ID. I
right,
am."
right.
Okay. Well, let me see. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'm gonna do a little introduction for my podcast, and that way people know who you are. Okay.
Cool. Love it.
Okay. Today, we have a special episode here on the Chronicles of Time. We have author Robert B. O'Connor on to discuss his most recent book, Jeep Show, a thrilling tale set during the Battle of the Bulge. As I read Jeep Show, I felt as if I was along on the journey. Mr. O'Connor has managed to give readers a riveting account on World War II. With it being the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, there is no better time than now to have Mr. O'Connor on and to pick up a copy of Jeep Show. So without further ado, let's welcome Robert onto the show. Hi there, Robert.
Hey, really, my pleasure to be here talking with you and your listeners.
Well, I am thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled to have a guest like you on, especially with it being the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. There's no better time to than now to honor it and to talk about
Yes,
the subject. So we'll jump right
that's
into the interview.
very
Um,
good.
what made you decide to write a book set during the Battle of the Bulge?
Um, I kind of tripped into it. I was very interested in writing a book about enlisted entertainers. And in fact, the book was inspired by a real person, Jim Hetzer,
Oh,
who volunteered for the Army at the age of 30 in 1944. And he wanted to be a paratrooper, but because of his show business background, they put him in the Morale Corps. And he was a military occupation specialty 442 entertainment soldier, as was many other soldiers with show business background. I wanted to involve the Battle of the Bulge because the Battle of the Bulge remains the largest action ever fought by the United States Army. It was a gigantic battle that raged from December 16th, 1944 to January 25th, 1945. So it was a historic event in World War II, and it was essentially Hitler's last big gamble. And it was a rash gamble. It was Hitler's last big throw of the dice in World War II.
right.
Um, and in fact, this is how I decided I would write fiction. My first book was nonfiction because I wanted to base it on the life of this real person who had been an enlisted entertainer, but I also wanted to get him swept up in the Battle of the Bulge and several other key events in World War II. So I needed to make it a story rather than nonfiction.
You did an excellent job. You did
Thank
great.
you.
And speaking 30 years old, that's a little older for someone to join the army back then.
Yes, there's a sort of an undertone or a theme, which, by the way, nobody gets except me, that he might have been at age 30 kind of, he was very patriotic, as were almost all Americans then, very patriotic. And there was great pressure on men, young men, to join the arm, to join the service. He might have been also trying to escape some of the normal complications and frustrations of adult life. He doesn't say so in the book, but this might have been a way to kind of step into the simple but not easy life in the army as a enlisted man.
Okay. And you can absolutely almost get that from the book. And when you're reading, you can almost draw that conclusion with Mr.
Yeah.
Tan. Absolutely.
Well, one of the theme of escaping is, I tried to, kind of build it throughout the book because as you know, he gets by accident caught up in the Battle of the Bulge. They're doing a show on the very front lines on the almost on the German border. And so he's constantly one step ahead of the invading German army the whole way, and if you will, escaping in real life, physically escaping to echo, what he might have been, why he might have joined the army. So it's a tale of escape, if you will, and then very importantly, turning and fighting
Yes.
at some point, which
Yes.
we all have to do. We all tend to kind of step back from our troubles and maybe try to avoid them. But in the end, if we're going to have a decent life, we have to know when to turn and fight.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and I enjoyed the decision that you made the book fiction rather than nonfiction. And what took you down the route to someone like Jim Tanzer?
Um, I started my career in marketing at Procter& and Gamble, the big soap company. There is a legend at Procter& and Gamble about the Oxydol Circus.
Okay.
Essentially, a circus promoter convinced the Oxydol brand manager in the mid 60s to sponsor a traveling circus, and it was called the Oxydol Circus. To make a very long story short, it turned out to be a disaster, humorous in retrospect, but a complete failure. The promoter who convinced the Oxydol brand manager to do this was Jim Hetzer. I was interested in writing about the Oxydol Circus, and I still plan to. But when I talked to Jim Hetzer's daughter, she said, you're not aware, but my father was an enlisted entertainer in World War II and worked with Mickey Rooney in the European Theater of Operations." And all of a sudden, I knew I had discovered a story worth telling. I have talked to many World War II historians and then amateur historians and World War II buffs and World War II nerds. And I have yet to meet one that knows about the existence of enlisted entertainers and Jeep shows. So I knew it was a story worth telling. I wrote fiction, as I said, to involve in this historic Battle of the Bulge. I also felt that I could reach a reader who may be a little bit not ready. There is so much excellent nonfiction about World War II and the American efforts. Excellent. But it can be a little daunting to to readers who, really just want to read a good story.
Absolutely.
And so I decided I could be very historically accurate, but appeal to these kind of readers by telling a good story involving the protagonist, who I have named Jim Tanzer. And by the way, Tanzer is the German word for dancer,
Oh,
which was his show business. When he tried to make it in show business before the war, he tried to make it as a professional dancer. And then he was a dance instructor before he volunteered for the army. So
yes. Oh,
that's how I got to
I
fiction.
love that. I love it. And you had mentioned Mickey Rooney, but and that'll bring us right into my next question.
Sure.
He performed in real life in these Jeep shows. And can you tell us a little bit about both him and the Jeep shows?
Yes, absolutely. Mickey Rooney's a fascinating figure. He was the number one worldwide box office attraction of 1938 and 1939. He was considered a genius by many of the directors and actors he worked with. He could do anything. He was a brilliant actor. He was super funny at stand-up. He did brilliant impressions. He learned to play the banjo in one day. Truly a genius. Now, where there are great strengths, there are usually corresponding great weaknesses. And
Absolutely.
his personal life, the best word I could come up with was dissolute. He partying hard does not describe his personal life. Hard times three.
I saw
Um,
the list of wives. It went
yes,
on and on and
yes,
on.
yes. I'll give you his first wife was Ava Gardner, probably the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, and he cheated on her.
I'm studying Frank Sinatra right now, and I believe there's a
Yes,
connection between the
yes,
two there as well.
yes.
Oh,
So by 1944, his star was probably dimming a little bit because his major money-making role was Andy Hardy, a teenager,
okay.
in a series of Andy Hardy movies, very popular. By 1944, he was getting a little bit too old to play a teenager.
Right.
And as he joked, he was at 5'1", he was too short to be a leading man and too tall to be a producer. Uh, he joined the army under there was some pressure for celebrities of that of draft age to join the services. To his credit, though, he went all in and joined the army and shipped out to the European theater of operations. He could have joined the army and worked at Hal Roach Studios in Hollywood, 10 minutes drive from his house,
Right.
making, important films for the Army and the Navy. Lieutenant Ronald Reagan worked at Hal Roach Studios, doing good work.
Right.
But Mickey Rooney was all in, and he joined the Morale Corps and was shipped to Europe. And be as famous as he was, he did many things, armed forces radio and appearances. But importantly, he did Jeep shows. And if I may, I'll give a little background on the Jeep show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, the the Morale Corps battalion that Mickey Rooney was in, and my protagonist Jim Tanzer was actually shipped overseas as part of a big show put on for soldiers in the rear echelon called Hip Hooray. Big variety show. They had a band, an army band. Classic big variety show of the day. When they got to France, though, their orders were changed without explanation, which was very typical of the army. The Broadway director Joshua Logan, famous for South Pacific and many other hits, was a captain in the Morale Corps and decided that the frontline combat soldiers were not getting USO or Red Cross attention because it was too dangerous and too far away. And he decided that Jeep shows would be the answer for entertaining, building morale of frontline combat soldiers. And Jeep shows were three enlisted entertainers, that is Military Occupation Specialty 442, three enlisted entertainers and a driver, and they would drive to really just behind the front lines. And the combat soldiers would be brought back for a hot meal, possibly a uniform exchange, and they'd get this show. Uh, the importance of the show was not just entertaining the soldiers, but it was also the physical presence of these entertainers just being there. And, as we all know, when you're going through difficult times and being combat infantry is very difficult, just other people showing up and being present is very important. So the Jeep shows were very successful. Commanders asked for more when, as soon as they could get them. And Mickey Rooney was uh, a squad leader of a Jeep show. And as it figures in the book, you actually get to see an actual Jeep show featuring Mickey Rooney and our protagonist, Jim Tanzer.
Right, right. And it was, yes, I loved reading that. It was wonderful. And the Jeep
Good.
shows were just so interesting to me because, like you said, I've read World War II history and I've studied and I thought I knew a lot. And then I find this out and I had no idea even about them. And it was so interesting to read about because you think about war, but you don't think about morale and
Right,
necessarily bringing happiness, but that's what they need this boost
right,
whenever they're at their lowest.
right.
This boost of morale can get them just what they need. And I love how you went to the hospitals with it and
Yeah,
visited the wounded soldiers because it almost brought me to tears, reading about it because they really needed that. I
absolutely.
I loved it.
Th There's a famous quote by Napoleon, which is morale, speaking of fighting forces, morale is to the material as three is to one.
Yes.
And we think about in life, all you have to do is look over at the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian and why the Ukrainians have done so well against all odds. Well, the Ukrainians are protecting their home and their country and their families. The Russians are draftees or mercenaries, and so there's no comparison of the morale between the two sides, and that encapsulates it very well. The army went to great lengths to try to maintain or raise morale. In the rear echelons, they did many things essentially because soldiers get bored,
Mhm.
and when they're in the rear echelon and they get into trouble. So if you give them activities, the Army, for example, issued baseball and football equipment, and the Army issued millions of what were of books that were called Army Service Editions in World War II. And these were popular books reprinted kind of sideways so they would fit in the field jacket of soldiers, and they were very widely read. And there were also in the rear echelon soldier shows where a cast of soldiers and a crew of soldiers would put on a popular play of the time. But when we get to the front lines, they can't do these things. So what they can do is a Jeep show.
And I have a quote here. You mentioned the quote from Napoleon. I had written my notes. My favorite quote from the book that you had written was, "But the thing is, mate, morale is the showing up, the being there." And I love that. I wrote it down because, like you're saying, it's just being there for these soldiers. And I thought
Yeah.
that one line in the book was just
Yeah.
almost encapsulate the entire book in the essence of what you were trying to write. And I thought you did a beautiful job with it. And even that one line can get so much across. And
Thank you. That I was very interested. That line was echoed actually by a British enlisted entertainer in what was in the British version of the Morale Call Corps called ENSA, ENSA, which the soldiers nicknamed every night something awful.
yes,
Um,
yes,
but again, it wasn't the quality of the show. It was the being there. It was the fact that these enlisted entertainers had made their way to the front lines and spent the time. So yes, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. My editor pleaded with me to put that quote in the Jim Tanzer's mouth, but I really felt I needed to pay a small tribute to the Brits because they don't get much mention anywhere else in the book.
in and I like it. I like the decision that you kept it there because Jim Tanzer he has wonderful things on his own, plenty of other lines, but that
Yeah.
was wonderful hearing it from not only a soldier but a soldier from the British, as well
Yeah,
as well.
and don't we love a British accent, especially like a Cockney accent or a Northern British accent, after watching All Creatures Great and Small,
Yes.
and
It's
picking up on,
charming.
yes, it is charming and different, but we as Americans who read, we know we are familiar with them enough that we can understand what they're saying. So,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, hence the mate. And that makes sense.
Right,
I love it. I
right.
love it. Because now that you said it,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, that makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, I discovered that expression, bloody banging. That was, man, that was terrific. Bloody banging.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
love
love
that
it.
one.
I love it. You can tell, you can like the whole lot of them. They say the whole lot of them.
Yes, yes, the lot. It's funny, I collected expressions and slang like, people collect stamps. I collected a long list of slang and then worked in what made sense for the book. But I really wanted the readers to get that extra interest of how people talked back then. And it was a little different.
It was, and it was nice to hear because you felt more like you were actually there in the time living with them and having the
Yeah,
journey with them instead of just kind of watching from the looking glass. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yes.
And you also, a reoccurring topic in the book is the economy back in the States. Yet the soldiers they were concerned about returning home and it being difficult to find work. Was this an issue, or whenever they returned home, was there enough work for them?
Yeah, as it happened, I'll give a little background. America, as did the rest of the world, slid into a deep economic depression in about 1931, 1930, 31, and it literally lasted until the start of World War II. So for us, that would be 11 and a half years. Uh, what rescued the American economy was defense spending. We had to create from almost scratch an army, an air force, and a navy to fight a world war on two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. And the government spent a lot of money. One thing that was very fortunate or timely was at least half of American factories, because of the Depression, were not uh, making things. So that there was plenty of capacity, and unfortunately, there was plenty of unemployed workers. So when the government opened up its checkbook and started writing big checks to manufacture tanks and rifles and battleships and airplanes, uh, the American economy responded. So for workers during the war, it was the best of times. Wages were high. There was plenty of work. There was a lot of migration to areas where defense work was going on. Changed the map of America. But the Depression, 11 years of desperate unemployment, had left a scar. So there was widespread belief that, when 10 million soldiers returned home, there would not be enough work for them, and that those depression conditions would continue. That was not the case because the American economy, because it had been so stimulated and because manufacturers turned from war materials to consumer things, and of course, automobiles,
Mhm.
uh, the economy boomed from about, let's say 1947 until 1974. There was an incredible historic economic boom in America, which we now fondly remember and want to think of as normal, but not necessarily so.
Okay. Hmm. I like that. So they had job security whenever they came home. They were fine.
They were fine. They had to, they came home different men. Many of them left as boys almost,
Right.
and they came home as different people. But there was plenty of work, and also uh, the government in 1944 passed a bill. We call it the GI Bill. And basically, the GI Bill was set up to help the soldiers coming home. So one of the factors was that you could have 52 weeks of $25 a week payments from the government while you found work. $25 a week, believe it or not, was enough to live on. Not lavishly, but enough. And then secondly, the government subsidized purchase of housing by veterans, which of course helped the economy boom
Mhm.
because housing construction is a fundamentally important economic driver. And then secondly, the government heavily subsidized veterans going to college. And this led to a whole generation of veterans like my father coming out of blue collar, non-college educated families, attending college and being college graduates, and thus earning higher salaries and paying higher taxes for the next 40 years. It
Yes.
was, in my mind, with the civil rights movement and World War II as a whole, one of the three most important social programs of World War II, of the 20th century, that really changed the face of America. So to summarize, the government through the GI Bill put in place important programs that made it easier for returning GIs to get back into society, to find work, or to go to college.
Okay. I like that. I was very curious whenever I was reading. I was
Yeah,
wondering because it was a question during the book, and I was wondering like after I read, I was like, did these soldiers find the work that they were wanting, and whenever they came home? And so I'm
yeah,
glad that I have my answer because I was very
yeah,
curious, and I didn't want to look it
yeah.
up because I knew we were going to have this conversation.
Right,
I was like, I'll
right,
just wait. I'll wait and see
right.
what he says.
Yeah,
But I
yes,
love it. And
good.
my last question is, what can we expect to see from the excellent Mr. O'Connor in 2025?
I have to push you to 2020. Well, in 2025, I will try to promote the book to get the widest readership, and I'm thinking of renting a truck, filling it with books, and driving from bookstore to bookstore across the United States, making appearances. I doubt my wife will allow that, but
You can
it's a
try.
thought. And then I am working on a sequel that will cover the years 1946 to 1953 and thus the Korean War, 1950 to 19, I think mid 52. I haven't done my research yet.
You can try.
Um, and I don't know why I can't get the protagonist involved in the Korean War as well. Probably not as an enlisted man,
Right.
but possibly as an entertainer. So I'm hoping there'll be a sequel in 2 years. One thing I learned writing this book, which took me more like 7 years, was uh, don't do huge amounts of research before you've decided on exactly the plot because you will end up leaving massive amounts of research on the cutting room floor.
Yes.
Um, I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Rachel, research is fun and writing is hard, so it's easy. It's easy to let yourself do too much research. I hope I avoid that mistake on the sequel, but that's what's coming up. That's the most important thing next.
Well, I can't wait to see it, and I will definitely be getting my copy of whatever is written from you, no matter what it is,
Thank you.
because you have me sold on anything you write. I loved it, and I can't wait. I cannot wait to see what's to come, and maybe on that sequel, I'll have you on again, and we'll talk about the next book.
Yes, and if you don't mind, Rachel, I'll tell your listeners that I have a website which gives a lot of background on the book. It is jeepshowbook.com. And then Jeep Show is available on Amazon and bookshop.org in a printed edition, an audio book, and an ebook. So if people follow your recommendations, they can obtain it that way now.
Yes, and I absolutely should read it. It was a wonderful read, and you did a magnificent job. And I just want to let you know that I'm so excited to have had you on, and I'm excited for what's to come for you, Robert. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for coming on the show today.
Certainly my pleasure, Rachel. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.